This country looks like a complete fairy tale. A turreted castle on a cliff, snow-capped Alps and a reigning prince. But this isn't a Disney movie. Women didn't get to vote until late in the 80s, and before Liechtenstein became a country, it faced a lot of misery. So, want to know how they overcame those challenges and rise to the top? Well, you'll have to stick around because I'm laying it all on the table. Back in the 1600s, the House of Liechtenstein was incredibly rich. It had massive estates in what is now Czechia and Austria. But there was one problem. It wasn't considered important enough. Because in the Holy Roman Empire, if you wanted a seat at the big table, you had to own land that was immediate. Meaning, your country answered to no one but the emperor himself. Well, Liechtenstein didn't have that. Not yet, at least. Meanwhile, in the Rhine Valley, two tiny territories called Schellenberg and Vaduz were having a rough century full of plagues, famine from the 30 Years' War, and terrifying witch hunts. The local rulers at the time, called the Counts of Hohenems, were broke, and frankly they were terrible at their jobs. That's when Prince Johann Adam Andreas von Liechtenstein enters the picture. He bought Schellenberg in 1699 and Vaduz in 1712. He honestly paid way more than they were worth, but he didn't care about that. Or the land. All he wanted was status. Then, come 1719, the emperor decided to unite these two lands and officially named it the Principality of Liechtenstein. And just like that, a country was born. But guess what? The prince and those that followed him were so high society that they didn't even set foot in Liechtenstein for the next 120 years. So basically, they were just ghost owners of this country. When 1806 arrived, Napoleon came through and smashed the Holy Roman Empire into pieces. Naturally, you'd think that something as small as Liechtenstein would have been swallowed up by its neighbours. But actually, Napoleon liked this tiny state and decided to let them stay sovereign. By 1866, they became fully independent and did something pretty crazy. They disbanded their army. Why, you ask? Well, after the Austro-Prussian War, the prince realised the 80-man army was too expensive and useless, so he practically sent them home. And they haven't had a military since 1868. Even amidst World War I. At the time, Liechtenstein was pretty close to Austria, but when the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed, Liechtenstein realised they were on the wrong side of a sinking ship. So they did a strategic move and pivoted towards Switzerland. In the early 1920s, they adopted the Swiss franc and entered a customs union. It proved to be the right call, because it essentially kept them neutral and protected during World War II. While the rest of Europe was in chaos, Prince Franz Joseph II did something radical in 1938. He moved into the Vaduz castle, making him the first prince to live in the country full-time. Now, Liechtenstein wasn't just a tax shell, it was home. It was a home that went from a poor farming village to a global financial powerhouse in 1945. But it wasn't without hurdles, because entering the modern world proved to be more challenging than they realised. In fact, in 1984, they were the last country in Europe to give women the right to vote. Then in the 2000s, they got put on blacklists for being a tax haven. Since then, they've cleaned up their act and signed a ton of transparency agreements to stay in the world's good graces. But despite these changes, one thing that really set Liechtenstein apart was its politics. Unlike most modern monarchs who are only figureheads, the Prince of Liechtenstein has real power. And in 2003, the people actually voted to give the reigning Prince Hans Adam II even more power, including the right to veto laws. That's a lot of trust they're putting on their leader. But it didn't stop there, because today the day-to-day work is handled by his son, Prince Alois. So now that we have the context of this country down, let's take a look at what we're actually dealing with. And the best way I could describe it is if you were to drop a pin right in the centre of Liechtenstein, you'd find yourself in a landscape that's 2/3 rugged mountains, which would be the Retikon Mountains. These are a part of the Central Alps that dominate the eastern side of the territory. Because of this, most of the country sits at an elevation of over 6,000 feet. That's about 1,800 metres, which means you're getting some seriously crisp mountain air. But among all these peaks, the so-called king has got to be Grauspitz. It towers at 8,527 feet, or around 2,600 metres. And just so you get the big picture here, It's the kind of place where the lower slopes are draped in lush evergreen forests and alpine flowers, while the summits stay covered in white snow for most of the year. Now, if you're not really a mountain person, don't worry. It's not all jagged rocks and vertical climbs here. If you head to the western part of Liechtenstein, you'll get a totally different landscape that's defined by the Rhine River floodplain. Does that sound familiar to you? Well, that's because the Rhine is a massive European artery, stretching about 820 miles, or 1,320 kilometres, and it acts as the natural border between Liechtenstein and Switzerland. Okay, so you might be thinking, this country is filled with mountains and water. It's gotta be freezing here. Actually, you'd be surprised because the climate is pretty mild, thanks to the warm southerly wind called the Föhn. This wind keeps things pleasant enough that people can actually grow grapes for wine and corn, which are things you don't normally see at these heights. But watch out for winter, because the lowest temperature can reach 5 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 15 degrees Celsius. Now let's take a closer look, shall we? Geographically and politically, the locals divide this country into two main regions: the Unterland, or the lower country, up in the north, and the Oberland, or the upper country, in the south. These most likely sound new to you, but what if I told you that they're just the modern versions of the original lordships, Schellenberg and Vaduz? Within these regions, you've got 11 municipalities that act like little self-governing towns. The capital is, of course, Vaduz, where the castle sits. It houses about 5,868 people, and it's where all the big government and business decisions happen. But if you're curious to know where you can find big city energy, or at least big in Liechtenstein standards, head over to Schaan. It's the largest town, covering about 10.39 square miles, or nearly 27 square kilometres. Not that big, right? Well, that's actually pretty beneficial to you because getting around means it's super straightforward. One of the main lifelines is Highway 28, which zips you from the southern tip all the way to the north. As you drive, you'll see a mix of deep tradition and modern globalism. Heck, you might spot a McDonald's or a Subway, which are clear exports of Western culture that have made their way into the Alps. Now the question is, how does a country with only 160 square kilometres, that's about 62 square miles, and a population of about 40,000 people become an absolute economic titan? Well, it all comes down to a very unique power-sharing agreement. Let me break it down for you. Liechtenstein is a constitutional monarchy, but it's not like the UK where the royals are just for image. As we talked about earlier, the prince is a major player. Not only can he veto laws, but he also has the power to dissolve the Landtag. That's their 25-member parliament. And yes, while the princes, both Prince Hans Adam II and the hereditary Prince Alois, are in control, the country also follows a high-tech democracy. Combine those two together, and you've got a stability that truly pays off. As of 2025, Liechtenstein's GDP was sitting at $9.42 billion. Sounds small for global standards, but if you break that down, the per capita income is over $231,000, which means Liechtenstein has one of the richest populations on the planet. Oh, and unemployment? That's practically non-existent. Okay, now I want you to think back to our history lesson. Remember when Liechtenstein was blacklisted for being a tax haven? Yeah, even though they resolved that issue a long time ago, people still think of secret bank accounts when they hear Liechtenstein. And I totally get it. The financial sector is still massive here. It makes up about 40% of the economy. There are 17 banks and over 270 licensed fiduciary companies managing more than 73,000 entities. These are kind of like trusts and corporations. Just to put that into perspective, that's basically saying there are two companies for almost every single human living there. But you don't have to worry because they've modernized a lot. Now, they lean into transparency and strict know your customer rules to stay off global blacklists. And the good news is, unlike other countries that are a one-trick pony, Liechtenstein isn't just about banking, because its manufacturing and high-tech industry account for 30% of its GDP. What are they manufacturing, you wonder? Well, they specialise in those small but expensive stuff: precision instruments, pharmaceuticals, and high-end machinery. In 2022 alone, they exported $6.5 billion worth of goods, while only importing $4 billion. That's a $2.5 billion trade surplus, which is a massive flex for a country you can drive across in 30 minutes. Part of their success is thanks to their tax system. It's incredibly business-friendly, with corporate tax rates ranging from 12.5% to 18.5%. They also have a very lax VAT of only 7.7%. And because they are members of the European Economic Area, or EEA, they get to play in the European market for free, but they keep their close-knit bond with Switzerland, using the Swiss franc as their currency. They face challenges, sure, but they've positioned themselves as the boutique country of Europe. So, as you can imagine, life here is a fascinating blend of high-tech modernity and deep-rooted tradition, all set against a backdrop that feels like a village. Pop quiz, how many people live here? That's right, 40,000. And despite that small size, there's surprisingly a lot of diversity. 2/3 of the residents are native Liechtensteiners, mostly of ethnic Alemannic German descent. The rest are foreign nationals, primarily from Switzerland, Austria and Germany. But if you think their differences keep them apart, you'd be dead wrong, because they're a tight-knit community. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Locals even joke that you have to watch what you say, because a cousin of the person you're talking about is likely standing right next to you. Yikes. Culturally, though, Liechtenstein is a close relative of Switzerland and Austria. They speak German, but the flavour is a unique Alemannic dialect that can be so thick, even Germans have trouble understanding it. Now, if you head up to the mountain region of Triesenberg, you'll hear the Walser dialect, a linguistic relic from 13th century settlers. And honestly, it's kind of like time travelling to the past, with the scenery and all. Besides language, religion also plays a big role in their social fabric. About 70% of the population is Roman Catholic, and you'll see this influence in their holidays. A notable one is called Fasnacht. It's a pre-Lenten carnival, where the streets fill with colourful costumes and Guggen music brass bands. But the biggest event's got to be their National Day on August 15th. It's nothing short of a ginormous party that combines a religious holiday with the late Prince Franz Joseph II's birthday. And just to give you a glimpse of how epic this is, there's the legendary Castle Garden Party, where the princely family invites the entire population to the lawn of Vaduz Castle for drinks and snacks. Then, there's the torchlight procession, which happens at nightfall. Hikers carry torches along the Fürstensteig mountain path to create a glowing line across the cliffs. For the finale, there is a massive fireworks display over the castle that lights up the entire valley. But whether they're partying at the castle or not, the locals love to be outside. They love skiing in Malbin or hiking mountain trails. That's why their brochure slogan promotes the alpine lifestyle. And after a day of breathing in that crisp mountain air, locals love diving into Käsknöpfle, which is their national dish. It's a hearty dough pasta smothered in local melted cheese and topped with sweet caramelised onions. It's basically the ultimate comfort food. Besides this, you might also want to get your hands on Reibel. This one's a traditional cornmeal dish that was once a staple for poor farmers, but is now a beloved breakfast treat. Honestly, living here has got its perks. From the high standard of living, to the free public transportation, to having one of the best education systems in the world. What's not to love? Or better yet, what do you love the most? Is it the fairy tale backdrop, the active lifestyle, the close-knit community? Maybe it's the delicious comfort food. Whatever it is, I want to know what your favourite thing about Liechtenstein is, so shout them out in the comments below. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one.